This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
And on October 17th, the CBC published a false headline based on dangerous disinformation that incorrectly stated that Israel was responsible for the explosion at the hospital in Gaza that resulted in the deaths of innocent civilians. And if you don't have it, I have it right here. That is the headline. It says, hundreds killed in Israeli airstrike on Gaza City Hospital, Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza says. And that was since changed, if you don't have this, to Palestinians say hundreds killed in Israeli airstrike on hospital. Israel blames Islamic Jihad. This still lives on the CBC website. So this headline, it's still there. It remains on the website. And I would hope that you would agree with me that, in fact, the Palestinian Health Authority is controlled by Hamas. I think that is a fact. The Prime Minister, the Minister of National Defense, the United States, the British and French governments all have definitively said that the attack did not come from Israel. So why won't the CBC?
If I may bring the members' attention to the facts and correct the record. CBC first reported on the terrifically horrific attack or a bomb in the hospital in the Gaza Strip based on an Associated Press report that is a trusted source of news for us. You'll notice if you go to cbc.ca or radiocanada.ca, news feeds from other trusted, reputable news organizations. And we cited the source of that information, as Madam Landsman has just pointed out. 90 minutes later, when we received the corrected information, we also updated the site. I just would like to say, we stand behind our journalism. In conflicts and in war, news comes at a very fast rate, and people are claiming on both sides of the story. Our journalists on the ground and in our newsrooms are obliged to measure and take account.
I appreciate that's an Associated Press article, and your mandate is to, you are responsible to Canadians. It's $1.4 billion of taxpayer money. But you said that that you stand by the statement. Palestinians say hundreds killed in Israeli airstrike on Israel hospital. Israel blames Islamic Jihad. That still exists. It is a headline that has been debunked by governments across the world, including even our own Prime Minister, albeit 7 days late. So I want to know if you'll apologize to Jewish Canadians. I want to know if you'll apologize to Canadians. And I want to know when we can expect a retraction from CBC.
Mr. President, I will, Mr. Chair, Monsieur le Président, I will not apologize because the journalism is among the finest in the world. Our journalists operate in an independent fashion, independent of management, independent of the board of directors, and independent of government and political influence. They are guided by the journalistic standards and practices, and I invite any member and any Canadian to refer to these practices on our website. They are transparent and they are public, and if you have a concern, anyone has a concern with our journalism, I invite you to address it to the independent ombudsman en français ou en anglais in order to have them independently investigate and review the application of our journalism.
I understand that you're not going to apologize for printing disinformation, but how can the CBC, who's committed to truth, who's committed to standards, not call Hamas terrorists? We saw a leaked memo from the Director of Journalistic Standards, that's Mr. Achi, who sent a directive to journalists for saying not using to not use or describe Hamas as a terrorist group. You do agree, it is fact that that Hamas has been listed as a terrorist organization in 2002 in this country, correct?
I will address the issue as follows, Mr. Chair. And I think there's a fantastic blog by our head of news, Brodie Fenlon, which you can refer to. He does this very often to comment on making journalism transparent, explaining to Canadians how we do the journalism. And in the case of attribution, this is a policy that we have had at CPC Radio-Canada for over several decades. It is shared and mirrored by many other reputable news organizations, including the Globe and Mail, the BBC, Agence France Presse, Reuters, and any number of other agencies. So I would just say the attribution, we use the word terrorist and terrorism and acknowledge that Canada, the UK, and the US consider Hamas a terrorist organization, but we, as journalists, do not make that attribution.
I would just return to my colleague's question. You'll see here that this is the article when it was originally published by the CBC. You claim that 90 minutes later it was changed. I have that article title. It's here. This is after 90 minutes. Now, in your journalistic standards, you say that, and I quote, "When we make corrections and clarifications online, we should include on the story page an explanatory note to the audience." Again, I have this article right here, and I don't see an explanatory note. So with the journalistic standard and integrity being so important, why wasn't this done?
My understanding, and again, as Mr. Julian pointed out, there were several other stories that followed those two that if you read the entire thread,
I'm not
you will
holding
see.
those other folks accountable. I'm asking the CBC with regards to your journalistic standards. You say that you're supposed to offer a correction notice. That didn't happen. Why?
Again, I defend the journalism and its independence.
I'm not asking about the journalism.
Yes, but I'm sorry, if I may answer, I would say, if I may answer, our journalists conduct themselves in an independent fashion. I cannot answer the question as to when they post a correction or when they do not. That is their business, and they conduct themselves according to the JSPs.
Ms. Tate,
and
it's
I'm
more
not
than
here
10
to
days
answer.
later. There's no
I'm not
correction.
here to answer on whether or not they corrected a piece of journalism or not. And
So,
again,
Ms.
I
Tate,
would invite you to, if you are concerned about the journalism, I invite you to reach out to the Ombudsman, just as every Canadian has the right to do so, if you do not feel
Sure, I would
that the
invite the member
journalism
to
has
speak
been
to you
adhered to.
directly and not to me, and perhaps to refrain from raising her voice toward me.
Madame Thomas, j'ai pas l'impression que Madame Tate a...
I don't have the impression that she raised her voice, but I do agree that the answers should come through the chair. Thank you, Ms. Tate.
Madame Thomas?
When an article is written blaming Israel for an airstrike that it did not commit, and that has been confirmed by countries around the world and intelligence agencies from around the world, and the CBC still insists that it stands behind that article, professing that the attack did come from Israel. That is, in fact, the spreading of dangerous disinformation. We're inviting you, Ms. Tate, through the chair, to offer an apology to the Jewish population in Canada, and I dare say to all Canadians, because they have $1.4 billion invested in this public broadcaster, and you are right, they do depend on you to tell the truth. So when the truth is not told, when a mistruth is spoken, when disinformation is spread, especially dangerous disinformation like this, an apology seems right. And if not an apology, bare minimum, a correction. Neither of those things have happened. So again, would you apologize to the Jewish population and all Canadians?
No, what I will say, though, is I'm going to quote from the article just for the record. After the first piece, there was a second piece updated that said, Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry said an Israeli airstrike Tuesday hit a Gaza City hospital packed with wounded and other Palestinians seeking shelter, killing hundreds. However, the Israeli military said it had no involvement in the explosion, which it says was caused by a misfired rocket from the Palestinian militant group Islamic Jihad. I think it speaks for itself.
Yeah, Ms. Tate, thank you. Thank you for, again, admitting that there was dangerous disinformation spread in that article.
I have not admitted that. I'm
read.
sorry, I'm correcting the record.
Un rappel au règlement, monsieur.
I have a point of order.
Line of questioning, and I would ask you, Mr. Chair, to enforce the rules that we have at committee.
Merci, Monsieur Julian, Madame Thomas. Je vous invite à ne pas faire dire à Madame...
Thank you, Mr. Julian. I would invite Ms. Thomas to not say that Ms. Tate said things that she did not.
Mr. Chair, I would give the floor to Lansman, please.
Madam Tate, Hamas itself admits that it uses terrorism to further its goals. Those facts are not disputed, and the choice not to call Hamas terrorists is willful obstruction of the facts. It is bias, and it does help Hamas. That said, your funding has increased 21%. Your ratings have dropped since 2016. The primetime ratings have dropped 7.6% since 2018. Trust is down 40%. That's a 60% distrust. I will never apologize for holding the CBC to account for $1.4 billion of taxpayer money that you receive. The NDP used to be an opposition party. They used to do that in committee. They used to do that in the House, and I will never apologize for that. But can you tell?
I'm sorry, Ms. Landsman, your time is up. Your 5 minutes is well over.
In the spring, Twitter determined that they would attach a label to public broadcasters. And they did this across the board. And the CBC, of course, had this done to its profile. And so it had a label that said government-funded broadcaster attached to it. And when interviewed, the CBC said that this was a threat to journalistic independence. This is curious to me because to have it announced that public dollars were being received and used by the CBC was somehow a threat to journalistic independence. And yet Ms. Tate has contended here today that receiving government money is not a threat to journalistic independence. And so I'm confused as to which one it is. On the one hand, when Twitter makes it public that government dollars, $1.4 billion, are being received by this organization to put out news, it is all of a sudden a threat to journalistic independence. But if a conservative was to bring that up, then no. It is not a threat to journalistic independence. My question to Ms. Tate is, if the CBC was given the opportunity to be truly independent and set free from the shackles of government money, would they be okay? Would they continue to provide Canadians with news?
It would be extremely difficult to provide news to many of the underserved communities, rural communities, your own community, Lethbridge, the North, Francophones living in minority communities across the country. We would not have sufficient funding because the reason there is no commercial private news in those communities is because it's not economically viable. So we have the privilege and the honor of serving Canadians in those communities using the public funding that we receive.
So when 100% of the CBC's budget is dependent on dollars being given out by the federal government, that would mean that there's dependence there, which is to say the opposite of independence. When the CBC CEO, the president, Ms. Tate, just said to me that they would not be able to provide the coverage without that money, again, that says that they are beholden by the government. They cannot survive without the government dollars, which means then that it's hard to believe that the news coverage is entirely independent. And so I'm curious as to how the CBC can then claim to be independent if they can't survive without the government dollars.
Well, should just correct the record. Our funding is not 100% government. We also have
Ms. Tate, I didn't say funding. I said budget. Your budget is 100%.
No, it is not. No, it is not. Our budget is $1.8 billion. The balance is earned revenue from advertising and subscription. So we have
$1.4 billion taxpayer dollars.
Plus another $400 million in earned revenue. And we manage that budget as best we can to deliver the maximum service across the country.
Sorry, the question was, how can you assure Canadians that you're functioning independently when in fact the CBC is reliant on government dollars?
I believe
the CBC took offense to Twitter attaching this label that they do in fact receive government dollars. And the CBC admitted that receiving those dollars, I quote, threatens journalistic independence.
If I may, on the Twitter issue, Mr. Chair, it was the accompanying Elon Musk diatribe that described government equals state-funded. And in a global environment that I have described, where 80% of the population of the planet is...
To be clear, Mr. Chair, just to clear the record, because I know Ms. Tate appreciates clean records, the label attached was government-funded.
Correct.
Not state-funded, government-funded.
That is correct, but if you read the diatribe of Elon Musk, you would know that what he was talking about was state-funded. And CBC
Again, the label was government-funded.
Point of order.
Monsieur Julian, sur un rappel au règlement.
A point of order.
Not allowing the witness to answer the question is, again, very unparliamentary. Mrs. Thomas knows this. If you could ask Mr. Chair that she respects the parliamentary rules.
Merci, Monsieur Julian.
Thank you, Mr. Julian.
Madame Tate peut compléter sa réponse.
You have 30 seconds.
To object to this labeling. It was a move and a campaign on the part of Elon Musk to, you're talking about badgering, to call any broadcaster, public broadcaster, and all our colleagues, ZDF, BBC, France Télévisions, New Zealand, Australia, all of the public broadcasters were attacked in this way. It was extremely important for us to clarify which we did.
Is an attack?
Merci, Madame Thomas.